Good day everyone, I am Mr. Adelio Ramon Jr. and I am here to present to you my analysis using the Marxist approach featuring Veronica Roth's most promising dystopian novel, Divergent. And let us now begin by discussing what Marxism is. Marxism was proposed by the very well-known German philosopher Karl Marx. Karl Marx is often treated as a revolutionary author and activist whose works inspired the foundation of many communist regimes. His works was centralized on what he called the theory of history, and when it comes to his economic analysis, critical engagement with contemporary capitalist society, raising issues about morality, ideology, and politics. Karl Marx is very well known as well when it comes to his prediction of a communist future. Illustrating what Marxism is, let us use the country America. So, if you live in America, you know how it works under a capitalist system, meaning there are different socio-economic classes. So, you may heard classes like the upper, the middle, and the lower class. And in addition to that, you might also hear words like blue collar worker, working poor, white collar. All these different terms define where someone stands on their society's socio-economic ladder. Some classes struggle while others rule the corporate world. To analyze and remove that struggle, Marxism came into play. To define Marxism in simpler terms, it's a political and economic theory where a society has no classes. Every person within the society works for a common good, and class struggle is theoretically gone. So that's what Marxism is. Marxist criticism, on the other hand, is a type of criticism in which literary works are viewed as the product of work and whose practitioners emphasize the role of class in ideology as they reflect, propagate, and even challenge the prevailing social order. In this type of criticism, texts are not just repositories for hidden meanings, but as a material product to be understood in broadly historical terms. Proceeding on the analysis of the book, let us now begin on how Veronica Roth has successfully conceptualized Marxism in her work. The first one is about the social structure in the future. So as you can notice, or as you have read the book, there are different factions included in the story. Those are considered the social structures. Second one is Veronica Roth gave her point of views about people's personality from their aptitudes. In relation to Marxism, it is related to how people are factors in constructing the system of the society. And the last one is about the social realities of people. It includes the social struggle, the division of classes, on how live and on how people live in a certain type of system. In analyzing this book using the Marxist approach, I came up with 5 major issues included in the story. These are the dialectical materialism, historical materialism, alienation, class struggle, and revolution, as the author Veronica Roth described it systematically. She shows the dialectical materialism by reflecting the antithesis, thesis, and synthesis. She described the historical materialism by showing the base and the superstructure. She shows the process of alienation that happened to the major character. She describes the oppressing and oppressed class that indicates class struggle, and she closed her story with the revolution process. So the first Marxist element or issue that is present in Divergent is what we call the dialectical materialism. Karl Marx also called this the theory of history. This concept is derived from two different ideas, the dialectic and the materialism. first is on Hegel's idea about dialectic, that history follows a pattern of progress through an ideological conflict. It includes the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. On Feuerbach's idea called materialism, it says that people come up with their ways of making sense the material conditions they are in. In simpler terms, people create interchanging, either opposite or against, or complementing or just the same, actions or words that do not just affect themselves but as well the system or the society where they are in. As how Karl Marx conceptualized this theory, he included three main ingredients under dialectical materialism. The first one is the productive forces, which includes the natural resources and technology that could change when there are discoveries, invention, and conquests of other countries and colonization of other lands. The second one is the mode of production or the economic system, wherein the most important thing to look for in this ingredient is the relationship and the distribution of power among various classes. And the third ingredient is the ideological superstructure, including the government, the law, politics, religion, art, literature, philosophy, science, and etc. To add more, when productive forces change, the mode of production needs to change as well. This is because for every set of productive forces, there is a unique set of class relations that is appropriate. And that is, for every set of productive forces, there is a unique distribution of power among the various classes. So meaning, if there is someone or there's a group of people who will be a deviant on that particular pattern, class struggle might enter or the class divisions might be in chaos. Focusing now on the concept of the thesis, synthesis, and antithesis, these are their meaning. Thesis refers to an idea, usually an intellectual proposition. Antithesis, on the other hand, is the refutation of that idea. And the last stage is the synthesis, which includes the thesis and antithesis, wherein there is a molding of the idea and there is a formulation of a new idea. Reflecting the process of dialectical materialism in Divergent, this was represented by Natalie Pryor, the mother of the main character, when she came to Dauntless and met Tris in the visiting day. She said that there was something between erudite and abnegation, and she wanted Tris to meet Caleb in erudite and find out the problem. And she could not explain more about this information. That is considered as the thesis. On the other hand, the antithesis was represented by Caleb's explanation. Caleb did not believe with Tris' argument. As a member of Erudite, he believed with his faction leader more. He believed that some big thing had happened between Erudite and Abnegation, but he did not believe that Erudite was wrong on that part. And lastly, on the synthesis, it was represented by Tris and Four, after Four found the secret file that looked like a war plan. So they stopped the simulation and the war within their society was over. So that is the process of dialectical materialism in Divergent. The second Marxist issue present in Divergent is what we called the historical materialism. It believes that human beings form ideas under the influence of circumstances and then compel them to change circumstances. It believes that there is free will, but history is not determined by these freely willed intentions. Karl Marx created a diagram which explains that the ideas of the human is under the influence of the circumstances or the current situation where they are in. In this issue, two element or concept will enter the scene. These are the superstructure and the base. The superstructure is the government, the family, religion, education, and culture, while on the other hand, base is the economy. We can define them as well as base as the infrastructures of the society, and superstructure are those elements that legitimates the power of the social class which owns the means of production. In Divergent, what we can consider as the base or the productive forces are the characterization in the story of the two groups, the people with faction and the people without faction or the factionless. So in Divergent, people who live in faction are divided into five groups: the abnegation, the amity, the candor, the erudite, and the dauntless. People who live without faction, or people who live their faction or cannot be accepted in the factions because of their aptitudes, are called the factionless. Another base that we can find in the story is the conflict itself between the erudite and abnegation, which affected the whole system in general. When it comes to the superstructure of the story, these are reflected on the institutional arrangements and the collective consciousness arrangement in the story. There is a certain kind of state which is reflected by erudite. So erudite has his essential function to means the productive forces from the simulation that they develop. It made erudite as the legitimation of power in the social class. Erudite was a faction which wanted to take over the authority of the government. So erudite representation, who is Janine Matthews, wanted to control people by using the simulation serum. She declared that if she was to become the leader of the government, she would guarantee people a new system. She would make the government improved and all the people would live in wealth and prosperity. But she made cruelest decision. The cruelest Janine's decision is she used the simulation in dauntless member to attack the abnegation. So from that attack, there are many victims from abnegation that was killed and suffered. The third Marxist element or issue that is also present in Divergent is what we called the alienation. It means experiencing the world and self passively or receptively as the subject is separated from the object. It is also a form of a social ill whose diagnosis looks to rest on a controversial amount of human nature. So alienation is a concept under Marxism which simply means that there are certain group of people or a person who is separated from the general or from the majority, affecting the whole system because that particular group of people or person might do something that is different from the pattern of the system. The alienation process in Divergent was reflected by the major character Beatrice or Trace Pryor. So in Divergent or in the story, she was alienated from her family, her environment, and her friends. When she was in abnegation, she was alienated from her family. She was different and she could not accept abnegation value in her life. She was too selfish and she was different from her family. Later, she decided to choose Dauntless as her new faction. So, after she transferred to Dauntless, her father was angry with her. She was alienated from her family and her environment again. She was not an abnegation member. This time, she became a member of the Dauntless. She became a stranger in a new environment, and then after second initiation, she was again alienated from her friends that it cost her to get the best rank in that initiation. The fourth Marxist element or issue presented in Divergent is what we called the class struggle. So class struggle is also the most or the main component in Marxism that Karl Marx formulated. So since Marxism upholds the belief that people in society should have equal rights and equal privileges when it comes to their needs, Karl Marx, in his theory of Marxism, wants to eradicate these classes and social divisions, and as well as to remove the social conflict. So Marx also described these classes as the basic units in social society or in a social system. So these classes are considered organized interest groups. We have here a list of classes that Karl Marx referred to. On the Asiatic mode of production, there are the bureaucrats and technocrats. When it comes to the slavery, there are freemen, slaves, plebeians, and patricians. When it comes to feudalism, there are this lord, serf, guildmaster, and journeyman. And when it comes to the capitalism, these are the landlords, peasantry, bourgeoisie, and wage laborers. The specific class struggles that is included or presented in Divergent are these three. The first one are the concept of the faction and the factionless or the social classes. Second one is the basing on the personal aptitudes in dividing the society. And the third one is the power structure of classes. So in Divergent, the society was divided into two social classes. The social classes were divided then based on personal aptitudes. People who had aptitudes compatibility, they would choose a faction as a place to live. But people who did not have aptitudes compatibility, they could not live in a faction and became a factionless. From that, it reflects the classes of the society as well as the power structure that indicates the class struggle. So the power structure and the classes of the society are reflected on some events in Divergent. The first concept of a power structure in Divergent is the conflict or the occurrence between the oppressed class and the oppressing class. So it was reflected by the erudite versus the oppressing abnegation. So the reason why erudite oppressing abnegation was because of their representative, who is Janine Matthews, who wanted to get the authority of the government to control the divergence and to make the society improve. She indicated that abnegation saved much divergent in their sector. She also wanted to control everyone under a simulation. She would develop better simulation serum to control every people. Explaining it more between the oppressing class or the oppressor versus the oppressed class. The oppressing class or the oppressor is reflected by erudite, who control dauntless under simulation. Erudite developed simulation serum and controlled dauntless members to attack the abnegations. Erudite wanted a life in wealth, comfort, and prosperity by taking the authority of the government. On the other hand, the oppressed class, which is the abnegation, they were attacked by dauntless under the simulation of the erudite. It is caused by the erudite themselves who wanted to take over the authority. Erudite did not agree with the abnegation simplicity way of living, so they wanted to develop new improved government and guarantee the citizens would live in wealth and prosperity. But as a oppressed class, abnegation fight for their right, and Trist was born as a divergent. We are now down to the last Marxist element or issue that is present in Divergent, which we called the revolution. So in revolution, based on Marxist theory, when the productive forces keep changing but the mode of production stubbornly refuses to change, forces of change begin to build up. When these forces gain enough strength, they unleash a revolution that forces a change in the ideological superstructure and thereby bring about the necessary change in the mode of production. That is because of the ability of the dominant class to resist, at least temporarily, any challenge to its dominance. Change will only happen in spasms called revolutions. In a simpler term, revolution is simply seen as a transfer of a governmental power. It is a matter of a change in personnel. So for Karl Marx, revolution is defined by the nature of the change involved and by socio-political relation. So in the popular mind, it is called as the ruling ideas or the idea of the ruling class. Revolutionary developments are primarily in terms of particular means. the force and violence as departures from the established power. In Divergent, the revolution that can be reflected will be found on the end of the story. It shows the process of the oppressed class against the oppressing class. The process was reflected by Tris. She, along with her father Caleb and Marcus, came to Dauntless headquarters, tried to saving Tobias and stop the simulation. After Tris realized Tobias who was under simulation, she asked Tobias to stop the simulation. So Tobias did it and he took the data and the computer. So later on, they escaped to Amity by train. So in that particular event, revolution happened when the oppressing class or some people on the oppressing class tried to fight the oppressor and aim for the peace on their society. And that's it. We are now done analyzing the book using the Marxist approach. These are the following conclusions. First one is that Veronica Roth, the author, explains the condition in the future where social classes are divided not on wealth but on personality. Second, Divergent reflects political conflict among factions and even with factionless. And the last one is that Roth reflected some Marxist elements and issues in her work such as dialectical materialism that happened to each character, historical materialism which features the base in the superstructure, the alienation, the class struggle, and lastly, the revolution. That's all and thank you for listening.